Kupo Moogles, TheShwantz27 here with a recap of Week 2 for the Coliseum 2 tournament. The Gladiators had Setzer's dice for this round, which is a whole lot of randomness, so each seed was very different from one another in spite of the same requirements for Final Kefka, as a win in the Coliseum got you 3 high-tier items, and all but 3 runners decided to get this reward, and as a coincidence, all 3 of those runners did not win their race. Although that wasn't the reason for their placement, correlation does not equal causation. We also had a lot of variations in prices of items at the shops, with the cheapest ones being 4 GP muscle belts, 67 GP remedies, as well as a 67 GP headband, a 688 GP to Zen Thief Marvel shoes, a 501 GP air anchor, 974 GP ice shields, 1,431 GP earrings, 26 GP elixirs, and the cheapest Phoenix Downs of the races was still pretty high for a Phoenix Down, but 6187 GP. On the flip side, the most expensive Phoenix Downs were in the GBMatt versus Jaime match at 62,000, Drulith Magre at 58k, as well as a $62,000 dried meat with a Gao start for the TheShwantz27 versus JexRock. Man, I hope that was some tasty jerky. All of the runners got Setzer with slots to start for all of their seeds. With these options in mind, how did the matches fare? Let's go over them individually. Magre versus Drulith started with Magitech Locke and Strago slot, so it was a pause buffers paradise that was augmented by cheap earrings and cat hoods in World of Balance South Figaro. It wasn't until 36 minutes into the seed, however, that both runners would be railroaded into last locationing their 4th character Edgar at Ebbets Rock with a vanilla hide and fight. After grabbing Gao from the Figaro throne, both runners went to the Veld to grab Shadow, and they were on the hunt for 4 more Espers to unlock Final Kefka. This proved to be a lengthy task, as peekable rewards at the Cave on the Veld, Figaro Castle Engine Room, and Moblez were all characters, with another character behind the Yeti Cave spot after getting him for Moblez. Meanwhile, the Tritok Cliff was an offering that Drulith had missed out on in the Coliseum. Magre chose Zozo, which was yet another character with Celeste as the reward, so he immediately went to the Magitech Factory, and Drulith headed to the auction house, which unfortunately for him was also not selling any Espers, so the back end of this seed must have been extremely frustrating for both runners. Although both of them got go mode around the same time, Magre's 9 bosses killed before entering KT versus only 7 for Drulith meant that a skip could be possible if all the bosses in the middle path were unique, and he even went backwards through KT after stepping on the statue switches with that overloaded party to the toilet Atma spot to ensure that he was able to get that Kefka Tower skip. Drulith actually stepped on the switches for Kefka about 1 minute before Magre. However, Magre's party had more levels since they fought more collective bosses as a group versus Drulith's split groups. This allowed Magre to catch and sync up with Drulith going into Tier 3 and eventually surpass him going into Final Kefka, as Drulith lost one of his characters to calmness, as well as spending lots of time watching the animations of his Genji glove offering fixed dice user, allowing Magre to grab a 136-27 to 140-30 victory over Drulith. The matchup between Dr. DT and Locke gave us a Strago Shock and Terra Steel start, with both runners heading to the cave to the sealed gate, Collingen in, and throwing down 5,093 GP for the Zen Thief Madeline Esper to put them at 3 shiny stones each prior to throwing down at the Coliseum. Locke had a rough first encounter before finally acquiring an Aura Lance for Terra, plus a Flame Shield Dragonhorn and an Experience Egg as the 3 high-tier item rewards. Dr. DT soon followed in the Coliseum, while Locke went into Daryl's Tomb for Phantom, having trouble keeping Setzer alive. It was the tale of 2 towers, with Dr. DT up Zozo for Bismarck and Locke heading up Fanatics for Magitech Realm, but had some trouble with the Gold Dragon first time around. Locke continued acquiring characters with his namesake, Locke at Esper Mountain, Edgar at South Figaro Cave, Celeste on the Figaro Throne, and Sabin at South Figaro Prisoner spot, while Dr. DT kept on collecting Espers at Doomgaze and Burning House before grabbing his 4th character, Mog, up in Kefka at Narsh, which is probably the worst spot for Mog because then you have to walk all the way back down to Lone Wolf just to walk all the way back up to get the reward again, but it was well worth it for him to grab Cyan. After getting Jump Gao at Doma Siege, Dr. DT ran into some awful Velt RNG, having to fight 6 battles before finally getting Umaro as the reward. Both runners found some dead checks with 8 espers like Force Check at Wealth, Behemoth Sooth at Imperial Camp, and Fixed Dice at Mount Zozo, eventually forced Locke to unsuccessfully try Goddess with a party of 2 at Mobliz for Bahamut, and Dr. DT to dig in the auction house with a first try Imp Robot. Both runners eventually found their esper at the auction house, with Dr. DT taking a detour to World of Ruin Miranda, finding a 1238 GP Atma weapon for his party, while Locke loaded up on Thunder Shields in World of Ruin Jador, going to Kefka's Tower about 4 minutes behind his opponent. However, a nasty poltergeist fight at the Guardian spot using Ultima forced both of the gladiators to refight Welk at the Inferno spot before figuring out how to deal with the spicy one. For Dr. DT, this meant reforming the party outside of Kefka's Tower to overload the middle and using heal rod strats on the Atma weapon user. For Locke, this meant fighting the Storm Dragon for extra levels to learn the stop spell, and fighting a side boss first to get the save point at the switches. We had simultaneous number 128 fights before Dr. DT stepped on the final Kefka switches first, and with a higher potent offense, that meant he was able to take victory in spite of losing his big damage dealer Atma weapon Genji Glove Terror to Calmness with a 141.17 time. Season 2 Ultras League Megalixir foes Falcon Hit and Fictus started with Gao Magitech Jump with a bad magic power of 24, and Cyan Steel, but with $32,000 earrings at World of Balance South Figaro, Gao was still the early game carry in spite of a 55,000 GP dried meat price for his Velt check. Both went different ways in the early game, with Falcon Hit going a more traditional looting route, whereas Ficta went to less traveled shops at World of Balance the Masa and Mobliz. Ficta got unlucky at the Coliseum on the first try, but both got their Behemoth suit at the same time for Orlance Red Cap and Gem Box as the other 3 high tier items. And then they both went to Doma Siege, whereas Falcon Hit's turned to have trouble with a grind fight on a pair of Wooly and Carcass. The runners then diverged again as Falcon Hit went to the Serpent Trench for an Aegis Shield, and Ficta went to Daryl's Tomb for Umaro, where he was greeted by a lengthy fight against Goddess. Falcon Hit was then inundated with characters, grabbing Rage Mog from Mount Zozo, Lure Locke from Lone Wolf, Jump Strago from Kefka at Narsh, who was also grabbed by Ficta at around the same time, peaking the reward from the Yeti Cave and continuing on up in Narsh. The character rewards continued for Falcon Hit with Sabin at South Figaro Cave, so he turned to Esper item reward checks like World of Ruin Narsh Weapon Shop and Search the Skies to no luck, as both were items, before finally getting an Esper at Cyan's Nightmare 1, followed by yet another character with Realm. Meanwhile, Ficta went into Kefka's Tower early to clear out some bosses and take advantage of leveling up without increasing scaling. While this seems like a Galaxy Brain play, unfortunately for him, he got unlucky to get hit by a level 4 flare from Atma at the Inferno spot to take a wipe, and then ran into Tritalk at the Toilet Atma spot without any fire damage, so then he decided to take on the Storm Dragon, which also gave him issues, and finally got us at the Guardian spot that put Cyan to sleep and Gao to death. Even though Falcon Hit ended up with 9 characters, an unfortunate Kefka Tower trip for Ficta early, and only being able to clear out the Inferno spot put him in a hole that was too large to climb out of, and Falcon Hit took home the win with a 122.05 time. The Flurry 14 and Green Monkey match had Blitz, Terra, and Sabin Sword Tech, but also easily accessible boots and horn in shops. The Coliseum rewarded both of our runners with the 3 high tier items of an Ice Shield, Minerva, and an Experience Egg. While our runners initially gathered Espers, both ended up at Magimaster almost 28 minutes in, but Green Monkey was able to crack the Ice Shield for initial massive damage, plus the defense ignoring attacks of Slots, Pummel, and Dispatch, while Flurry insta-reset out. Flurry got his 4th character with Locke before Green Monkey grabbed Edgar. However, both were at 4 characters and 7 Espers at the same time in spite of doing slightly different checks. Just a few checks later, both runners got go mode around the same time, with Green Monkey grabbing his 9th Esper at Search the Skies, while Flurry grabbed his 6th character on the Figaro throne. Green Monkey entered Kefka's Tower first, with Flurry fighting Ghost Train after completing the Phantom Train check, looking for more unique bosses to get the Kefka Tower skip. However, Kefka's Tower had a brutal boss placement, with Doom at the Inferno and Poltergeist spots, Goddess at the Guardian and Toilet Atma spots, Air Force at the Goddess spot, and Atma at the Doom spot. So Flurry's hope of a skip were dashed with these repeat bosses, and he did suffer a bit of a time loss grabbing Bum Rush before reforming his party in the tower, and this allowed Green Monkey to pull ahead to finish 132.52 versus Flurry's 148.20. Zelfer and Ensign Wesley's battle started with Strago Shock and Locke GP Rain. After simultaneously grounding in the South Figaro basement, Ensign Wesley went to the Coliseum to trade an X potion for an experience egg, along with getting 3 high-tiered items of Ragnarok, Magus Rod, and yet another experience egg. While Zelfer got destroyed by Goddess at the South Figaro cave, Ensign Wesley continued his grind in the Burning House, although the enemies here didn't offer much XP with Stray Cat or Vaporite Repo Man mobs. Zelfer soon followed, and both had to fight Umaro to get Umaro, which seems pretty obvious. Ensign Wesley used the double experience eggs to breeze through the checks and accumulate tons of levels, while Zelfer did not visit the Coliseum until much later in the seed, which meant his characters were level 23 at the same time Wesley's were in the low 30s. This level advantage, combined with Zelfer finding a few more characters as well as an imp robot in the auction house, meant that his patented Zelfer luck ran out in this race, with Ensign Wesley taking home the win 130-20 to 138-01, in spite of Zelfer being able to skip to the statues after an early dip into Kefka's Tower for extra levels. The bout between IB Karma and Zenobian gave the runners a start of Sabin with Throw and Umaro, so IB Karma almost immediately went to the Coliseum to bet an air anchor to win a Minerva, however had to fight the undead Senor Behemoth with Umaro on level 3, which took him nearly 4 minutes to complete the fight, never being in danger of dying due to lack of MP for the boss and a Yeti that had a ton of physical defense. This trip also yielded a Ragnarok, Snow Muffler, and Experience Egg as the 3 high-tier items. Meanwhile, Zenobian continued to loot and shop, finding cheap 1161 GP Strikers and World of Balance Nike to throw, and a 10,904 GP Ice Shield and World of Balance Miranda to crack. This allowed Zenobian to start on checks earlier, finding Locke at the bottom of Barren Falls, and made the fights in Imperial Camp much easier when both runners were in the same spot, not having to run from any mobs and miss out on experience. Haydn at Search the Skies died simultaneously for both players, but Zenobian had a large level and progression lead. Zenobian even went back into the Coliseum a second time with his higher levels to trade a Valiant Knife for an Illumina, which is, I guess, sort of an upgrade, and he was able to kill Doom at the Yeti Cave, whereas IB Karma had failed to do so slightly earlier in the run. Eventually, IB Karma found those cheap strikers to throw, but Zenobian found Go-Go for his 6th character at Ebbets Rock. However, he also found 4 more characters after that, with Terra at Phoenix Cave, Gal at Mobliz, Cyan at the Veld, and Mog at Doma Siege, which was probably only slightly worse than Brachiosaurs in a Thunder Shield Dead check Burning House for IB Karma. Eventually, Zenobian finally found some Espers and hit Kefka's Tower first, sending a full party up the middle, unlocking the skip at the Guardian spot. Level and Arsenal advantage was too much for IB Karma to catch up, as Zenobian advanced with a time of 125.48. Taco Mage and Jefe01 squared off with a Gao Magitech Blitz and Shadow Capture start, and some dried meat in an early chest, so our runners grabbed some cheaper 19,144 GP Thunder Shield and the 5165 GP offering from the Tizen Thief for a sniper before heading to the Velt and grabbing the Raiden Esper. Both runners had trouble with the first battle in the Serpent Trench with the magical resistant mob of Inuo, Goblin, and Thigalitz, which was a long time investment. Without items to revive characters, both runners ran from some of these crucial XP gaining fights, but at least the dead check gem box reward didn't hurt as badly since scaling didn't increase. They then both went to the Coliseum, nabbing a Genji Shield, Cat Hood, and Genji Helmet as the 3 high-tier item rewards. After completing Daryl's Tomb for a fixed dice that Setzer could use, Taco Mage decided to stay in the World of Ruin, getting an Esper from the weapon shop and resetting out of yet another dead check in the Velt Cave. Meanwhile, Jefe went to the World of Balance for Strago at the South Figaro Cave and dove into the Burning House, being greeted by a Poltergeist who almost took out Jefe's party, saved by a jumping fixed dice Setzer with 93 HP. Taco Mage regrouped to the Floating Continent as Jefe hopped into Kefka's Tower early to clear out the middle path and, using a stack of Thunder Shields, the right path, before running out of them and not being able to complete the Doom statue, but it allowed for extra levels for his characters without increasing scaling. However, this also meant that Taco Mage was able to rack up 3 Espers ahead of Jefe and allowed him to earlier deduce that his final character Celeste was in Ebbets Rock. Even though Taco Mage had to go through the entire tower, he was at go mode when Jefe was getting his last character in Kefka at Narsh with Mog and sitting through an imp robot cutscene at the auction house before finally getting his go mode Esper as Taco Mage was at the statue skip spot. Jefe took on the Toilet Atma boss to get his Kefka Tower skip, and he only had that one boss to go by the time the Taco Mage had cleared out the main path. An unfortunate death to the condemn counter on Vargas at the Doom statue gave Jefe a chance to regain the lead when he defeated the same boss just seconds later. Already having taken out the goddess statue meant that he was ready to square up against the final boss. But Taco Mage's quick fight and losing some time in the menus to ensure his party was equipped correctly meant the runners were neck and neck stepping onto the switches at nearly the same time. Jefe's potent offense plus Taco Mage losing Shadow to a Dread on Tier 1 without a remedy or soft gave him an early lead. Unfortunately, Jefe had to reset out of the fight at Tier 2 after Tiger used Doom Tusk on the Magitech wielding Gao without a Revivify, while Taco Mage forged ahead with his 3-character party, although he barely made it out of Tier 2 with Locke having 45 HP. Jefe then had a bad set of RNG with insta-death on his second attempt at Tier 1. Taco Mage also lost yet another party member to calmness on Tier 3, while Jefe got hit with a double N cross on Tier 2. However, since you really don't need great characters to throw Thunder Shields, that's how Taco Mage was able to persevere through a goner to defeat Final Kefka first in this back and forth race, 133-30 to 138-25. Down in the lower bracket, Mark and NobodyWar battled with the start of Umaro and Cyan with Steel, as NobodyWar decided after some grinding to head to the auction house right away to pick up an important Golem Esper, while Mark picked up the 6644 GP to Zen Thief Flame Shield and an offering in the Coliseum. He also grabbed Shadow from Daryl's Tomb and Gogo from Gal Manor before being trolled by the Chancellors and Zone Eater for Locke, while NobodyWar took 2 deaths to the White Dragon with random ability scaling on the opening spell cast, giving him fits of headaches, and then another wipe to Goddess at the Yeti Cave. After doing some grind fights for some levels, NobodyWar eventually took down the White Dragon and warped out, as Mark didn't have those troubles in the same checks since he was able to get Merton going earlier on in the seed. With NobodyWar feeling behind from those early game struggles, he went to the Floating Continent, while Mark got 2 Espers from a different multi-part check with Cyan's Dream. After grabbing his last Esper for the auction house, Mark went on a shopping spree looking for Phoenix Downs after running out due to a lengthy fight with Doomgaze, which allowed NobodyWar to grab his last 2 Espers in Cyan's Dream just after Mark entered Kefka's Tower. They were neck and neck as Mark walked back through Kefka's Tower after clearing out the middle path, with NobodyWar being higher levels, able to split his party to avoid all that backtracking. However, a fallen one with some unlucky slots meant a much longer fight against the Doom statue, so Mark pulled ahead, getting to the final boss first, 3 minutes and 10 seconds ahead of his opponent. However, his offense was not nearly as potent as NobodyWar's, even with Merton strats going on due to using an economizer in the relic slot instead of damage boosting earrings or hero rings. NobodyWar had access to Mute and Phantom, which also sped up his Tier 2, but at that time Mark was already going past Tier 3 using Golem to nullify calmness. During the charge up of Goner, Mark took off the shields that protected him from Merton all game and was finally able to dispose of Final Kefka 138-03 before NobodyWar's 139-15 in this very close affair. Tournament AdminBoo took on K-Toysix with the start of Celestial and Realm Runic, with a Bismarck Esper having a magic power plus 2 bonus from the Colingen in early meant that this seed was definitely going to be high potent offense. K-Toysix used the 4 MP Esper summon Odin from the South Figaro Prisoner to eliminate early grind fights quickly, while Boo took the fixed dice into the Coliseum with unfortunate results for the first few fights before getting a Minerva, Behemoth Suit, and Marvel Shoes as the 3 high tier item rewards. K-Toysix lost the Moogle Charm betting on the Minerva before getting his rewards as well. Both runners grabbed Shote from Daryl's Tomb and hit up the Magitech factory at the same time. Even though Boo had an extra party member with GP Rain Mog from Esper Mountain, K-Toysix had faster fights due to the Quad 9's fixed dice rolls on Ultros 1 and better AoE luck against Haydn that nearly wiped Boo's party, but Zombie Setzer only targeted himself, thankfully, and Haydn with the fixed dice, so Boo was able to eke out a W with only Celeste left standing at 39 HP. K-Toysix was able to continue to the minecart ride to get Phantom, while Boo had to warp out and heal up his party, making his way to World of Ruin Jador to Owser's Mansion to level up his characters, finding double Gigantos in the drop-down chest to catapult him ahead in levels, while K-Toysix had a 2 Esper advantage. After a pair of dead check Narsh trips yielding Genji armor at Lone Wolf and an offering at Kefka at Narsh for K-Toysix, Genji Glove, Fixed Dice Setzer, and Boo's Atma Weapon Celeste, the runners last locationed their 5th character, Cyan, at the Opera House. K-Toysix then went to Doma Siege and Mount Zozo for his last character Strago and Esper Shiva. Meanwhile, Boo took a chance on Cyan's Dream at 5 characters, 7 Espers. However, he did not find a character at Dream 2, so he did not visit the throne, taking his 2 Espers and grabbing Strago at Doma Siege, which allowed K. Doizik to enter Kefka's Tower first. However, it was a Magi Master at the Doom statue that gave K. Toizik's problems, while Boo powered through with his Genji Glove Fixed Dice offering user, while K. Toizik had to reform his party. The runners stepped on the final Kefka switches about 10 seconds apart. The shorter animation times and targetable fixed dice without offering on Boo's side, plus the Atma weapon on Celeste and Tier 3 Phantom strats allowed him eventually to pull away in the final fight 132-38 over 135-22, slim margin for the win. Match 27 featured TheShwantz27 against JexRock in an Ultras League Season 1 rematch from the Tide Runners of the Elixir B division with Sabin Tools and Gao Control Sketch. Schwantz found dried meat early and some imp gear to go along with boots and horn. However, JexRock found Illuminous for sale for 46,000 in World of Ruin Culligan when getting Setzer's free check, which Schwantz did not find, going into the World of Balance in for that reward. With Edgar from the Veld and Terra in Imperial Camp, as well as Genji gloves for sale in World of Balance South Figaro, JexRock could use the purchasable Illuminas on multiple characters, allowing him to make up for his perceived being underleveled versus Schwantz, who continued doing checks and having at least one party member being dead at the end of most of them meant that XP wasn't being gained across the whole team evenly. While Schwantz had Mog from Mount Kultz and did the Narsh loop, letting Gogo die for Ragnarok for Edgar and Esper from Kefka at Narsh and also Shadow at Welk, JexRock continued doing his checks at a faster rate than Schwantz because his increased offense, getting go mode first after getting his last Esper on the Phantom train. Feeling underleveled, Schwantz took on additional bosses in the form of Toilet Atma, going back into the Phantom Forest to fight Ghost Train, and even the Mobilist check, even knowing it was only an ice shield to gain levels while not increasing scaling. It's too bad that the Ghost Train was not a unique boss in Kefka's Tower, and the Mobilist fight was Ultra's Chupon, not rewarding any XP. JexRock decided to overload Party 3 in Kefka's Tower in order to get levels for his entire team without going for the KT skip and sacrificing some walking through the tower, and this strategy paid off for him when he got a round 2 best time of 1:19.44 over Schwantz's 1:40.24. The Turdsmen vs. Jackamus match started with Terra Throw Realm Dance, so both runners went to the cave to the sealed gate for a Magus Rod, which Jack took to the Leet River in order to gain a bunch of levels. However, it was a dead check reward of an Atma weapon, and Turdsmen got a Minerva from the Coliseum, along with an Atma weapon, Pearl Lance, and Genji Shield as the 3 high-tier items. The runners continued to diverge, but ended up fighting the same boss, number 128, in 2 different locations at the same time, with Owser's Mansion and South Figaro Cave. However, both ran into numerous dead checks, which forced our runners into a funnel, with the 5th character at Phoenix Cave being Shadow, and then the 6th character at the first spot of the Floating Continent with Strago. By doing Leet River, Jack's higher levels allowed him to complete checks much faster and was in Kefka's Tower first, needing only 1 unique boss for skip, and he grabbed it with the Toilet Atma spot. Meanwhile, Turdsmen hit go mode with the 2nd part of the Floating Continent and short-circuited out of that multi-part check at that time, but he did not have enough bosses for a skip and had to battle Poltergeist at the Inferno spot, which cost him even more time. Turdsmen eventually took down the Spicy Chicken as Jack started with the final battle, finishing first 1:20.39 over Turdsmen 1:40.01. The closest match yet of the Coliseum tournament was between Fantasticon and DoubleDown, starting out with Edgar Throw and Celeste Sketch, along with Umaro at the Figaro Throne for Coliseum fights. While Throw with random price shops usually means we don't get to see the usual cheap items to stock up on, we did find a plethora of replacements with 1146 GP Partisans, 1842 GP Heel Rods, 285 Murasami, 1613 Stunners, and 2800-ish Sky Renders. Fantasticon lost some time in the Coliseum early, however, both runners ended up winning the fight and getting 3 high-tier items of Marvel Shoes, Magus Rod, and a Valiant Knife. Unfortunately, none of those ended up being useful for their parties in the run. DoubleDown then followed up with a trip to the Opera House, and all he got was a red cap. Meanwhile, Fantasticon went to the Tritok Cliff for an Experience Egg and Strago at the Yeti Cave. Even though he didn't get the Experience Egg until a bit later, DoubleDown continued into the Magitech Factory to gain more levels with forced encounters, but he was level 25 by the time he got to the end of the check and ran into Doomgaze, forcing a reset. Thankfully, he saved after the cart crashed into the soldier, so it was just a minimal time loss. Both runners were looking for their 6 characters, and DoubleDown found his Shadow at Kefka at Narch, but had to slog it out with Magi Master, while Fantasticon went down to the Figaro engine room for Sabin, both going into Kefka's Tower at around the same time, even fighting fighting Chatternook simultaneously. DoubleDown split up his party, and Fantasticon overloaded Party 3, so he was through the middle section of the tower first, and got Kefka Tower skip at the Poltergeist spot, so he was able to hop back with 2 strong parties on the sides path, and he was able to step onto the final boss switch first, about 1 minute ahead of DoubleDown, who had Bum Rush on his Blitzstrago user prior to entering Kefka's Tower, while Fantasticon grabbed it during the skip party reform, both taking advantage of that experience egg. Fantasticon had Shoat for Tier 1, but missed with Odin on Tier 2, while DoubleDown had the Doom spell to quickly get through both of those parts of the boss, and that's where he surpassed Fantasticon. DoubleDown got a lucky Bum Rush on Girl first try, but Fantasticon threw a Sky Renderer at her for a one-shot kill. However, he got unlucky with a W-Wind hitting half of his party, so he had to spend some time recovering. Meanwhile, DoubleDown got to use Quick with his throw character to make fast work of Tier 3. DoubleDown was 1 throw and 1 Bum Rush ahead of Fantasticon in a nail-biter of a finish, 129.11 to 129.32, only a 21-second difference. GBMatt and Jaime had a roller coaster of a match that started with Cyan, Suratech, Natural Magic, and Mog with Rage. Matt ran into Stray Cat for Mog during a random encounter, while Jaime had to fend off a Dueler Fortis encounter at Kefka Narsh for levels, while also running into a Presenter, eventually forcing a reset out of the check. Matt got a Valiant Knife along with a Minerva and Gembox and Behemoth suit from the Coliseum. Matt also had some trouble at Kefka Narsh with Welk due to a confused party hitting the shell. As Jamian got go mode, Matt took another unfortunate death to Guardian at the first boss in the Magitech factory. He's able to claw back some time with a set of flame shields and buying 1431 GP earrings at World of Balance to Zen for Merton, but didn't get his go mode until Jamian was just about to step on the switches for Final Kefka. However, at 1 hour, 20 minutes, and 20 seconds into the seed, this is where the race actually began, as Jamian's levels were only in the low 30s, and in Tier 2, Doom Tusk hit his Genji Glove offering Atma Weapon user, which would have been extremely bad without any Revivifies, but zombie Atma Weapon users do minimal damage because they have 0 HP. It was just merely a time loss sitting through the 8 swing animation every time that character's turn came up. Even though the zombie was gone from his party after Tier 2, Tier 3's double Meteo made him start back from the beginning, which meant that Matt actually pulled ahead since he started his Kefka fight in the interim, and his party levels were in the high 30s, as well as the extra damage from Merton strats. When he got up to Tier 3, the lack of Phoenix Downs or any way to clear out Train meant that 2 of his 4 main party members were out and Umaro was in. After a few Havoc Wings to the face, Matt had to reset, which put Jamian back into contention. With both runners on Tier 3, Jamian's lower level party could not break through the Meteo hole and ate a calmness with his only surviving party member. But GBMatt was also on the receiving end of 2 instances of calmness to his party. Without a way to revive his team, sans Cyan's Life 2 spell in the final Kefka phase, he was just left with Setzer, who was not able to tank a non-split damage goner, so we were back at the beginning on both sides again. Another reset for Tier 2 on Matt when his only life caster Cyan was killed, and another one for Jamian due to recurring Meteo deaths on Tier 3. It was on Matt's 4th try that he pulled off the Phantom Summon to avoid calmness and finally destroy the final boss with a time of 2:21:15 after a collective 8 failed total attempts against Kefka. On the flip side of things, the tilt between Saberwolf and Jabinator was all about the very beginning of the race, as it started with Terra Dance and Strago GP Rain, meant going to the cave to the sealed gate early on, with an Esper having the Merton spell and an 18,244 GP economizer from the Tizen Thief meant we were on the hunt for fire and wind protection plus boots and horn and shops. Both runners decided to do force and counter checks first, with Saberwolf going to the Leet River and Jabinator to the Burning House. Unfortunately for both runners, Saberwolf ran into Tritok at the end with having no fire damage, which meant a reset, and Jabinator had to take a lot more time grinding on the Infinite Door Flame after finding Peepers in the Burning House. However, he was able to use Merton on Guardian with Terra in the air in order to get Celeste as the reward, whereas Saberwolf died to Vargas at the Welk spot and also fell to the Guardian at the end of the Burning House. Saberwolf decided to head to the Coliseum to get help, but found dried meat for dried meat and an Intangier to fight for a Behemoth suit, which was yet another reset, eventually winning a nondescript item to get the 3 high-tier items of Ragnarok, Thunder Shield, and a Behemoth suit. Jabinator got the clutch X-Zone after a first Coliseum death, while Saberwolf had to grab more levels by taking off the Moogle Charm. In spite of not getting a boss kill until 29 minutes into the seed, Saberwolf's early struggles meant he was very far behind. Jabinator also felt behind, but his 145-18 was good enough with this fairly difficult opener in the seed. In the Moogle's first tournament finals rematch between Boot Scooty and Gar, they were given Edgar Dance and Cyan Runic. Boot Scooty found 9,048 GP Flame Shields and 974 GP Ice Shields to use early on during grind fights, while Gar went to the Coliseum, had an Illumina reward for a Chocobo suit, but lost the fight, and then tried for an offering, having Cyan casting Runic 5 times in a row when the enemy was out of MP, thanks Coliseum AI, eventually getting a Snow Muffler, Experience Egg, and Minerva as the 3 high-tier items, which Boot Scooty never acquired. Unfortunately for both of them, Ultros and Chupon showed up multiple times early in the seed, even fighting the duo that doesn't give any XP or MP simultaneously. While Boot Scooty was chucking shields at things, Gar was resetting out of a dead sterile tomb, and yet a third fight against Ultros 4 at Cyan's Dream number 1. Eventually, Gar found the same cheap ice shield shop and decided to head back to Cyan's Dream, where Boot Scooty had also wandered off to. However, they were greeted by Master at the second spot in Cyan's Dream, so both took a reset, with Gar learning the Berserk spell during a grind after the save spot prior to taking the boss on a second time, which he was rewarded with Go-Go and then Umaro at Zone Eater. Boot Scooty did the Edgar loop instead, with Fenrir at the engine room and an Economizer at the ancient castle before wiping to the White Dragon. Luckily for him, there was Terra sitting in the Kefka at Narsh spot, so he did not have to go back to fight the Master. However, he did have to fight Doom with only 2 characters. Gar had his 5th character and knew with a Magicite in the Yeti Cave that his 6th was in the other world of Narsh, getting his go mode at the Welk spot. Boot Scooty had to trek up the Zozo Tower for Shadow and then Sabin in the Velt Cave. By the time Boot Scooty got his last 2 Espers, Gar had then cleared out most of Kefka's tower, including yet another Master at the Poltergeist spot. So Boot Scooty again had trouble there, and it allowed Gar to take the win in spite of a rough start, 126-43 to 149-33. This round also marked the start of Chupon's Pit, which had the matches using the Shadow's Ninja Star flag set from the previous week. This meant that runners started with Shadow and his natural throw command. The first match of the pit had Yakko Wacko square off against Vert's 505 with Strago Health and Locke Sword Tech, and a very difficult choice with the Norsh Weapon Shop between an offering and an offering. While Yakko Wacko took a defeat to number 24 in the South Figaro Cave at level 3 for an Esper, and to kill off Sid for a Thunder Shield, Verts went to the Burning House to grab some levels and defeat Inferno for Bahamut. Yakko Wacko dove into the Phoenix Cave, taking the Dragon for some levels on its characters, and came out with yet another offering, while Verts went to the Floating Continent, which is where the 4th character of this seed had to be. However, a difficult task of Master was the gate for the second boss of the arrival. With Throw, Meteor, and Dispatch, Verts on the second try, and then Yakko Wacko on his first try, were able to pull through, finding Gao waiting on the ground. After Setzer was found roaming on the Veldt, the only options for the 6th character without sequence breaking were Daryl's Tomb or the end of the Serpent Trench, where Verts found Umaro, while Yakko Wacko went to an out-of-logic Magitech factory for 3 Espers. Verts wanted to get 12 bosses prior to Kefka's Tower, but ran into Spicy Chicken at the Tritox spot and decided to leave it up at the cliff. Yakko Wacko eventually got his last character in the Serpent Trench, as Verts took another character inside of Kefka's Tower for some additional levels. Yakko Wacko was able to get to 12 bosses and skip ahead of Verts, who had walked through the tower normally and took a wipe to one of the dragons he decided to fight. Yakko Wacko also got to Kefka first, but he lost an offering Valiant Knife user to the Shockwave Death casts of Tier 1. He had 2 other VK offering characters for him with Final Kefka, but he got too aggressive with Quick after a fallen one and had to reset out due to an Ultima counter, while Verts was getting up to Tier 3. Verts ran into some Meteo trouble, with Tier 3 keeping half of his team on the floor multiple times before regrouping and moving on to Kefka himself, eventually eating an Ultima of his own, but having enough health to tank it and get the win with a time of 2:02:04 over Yakko Wacko's 2:06:50. The other match of Chupon's Fit featured Arusta versus JS827 1986 with Setzer and Steel and another health Strago. Arusta got off and running, quickly nabbing a Snow Muffler from the Coliseum with the auto image reward and took down Atma in Search the Skies, albeit with only Shadow left, hanging around to gobble up the full XP, while JS did his looting route, finding an experience egg in South Figaro and some others to change into more high-tier items in the Coliseum. JS then turned to Floating Continent to pump up his levels and grab the 4 bosses towards the skip, finding Celeste and Terab, while Arusta went to Daryl's Tomb for an Esper and did the looting that he postponed earlier in the seed, which meant he got the experience egg much later, and eventually followed in those footsteps of going to the Floating Continent. he immediately subbed in the characters found at the floating continent, but kept a party of 3 doing Welk and Kefka at Narsh instead of a party of 4 like JS going through the Magitech factory, which meant that Arusta's characters accumulated more levels and firepower as JS struggled against Haydn at the first minecart ride boss. Arusta found his 6th character in Umaro at Mobliz, then JS found Gogo at Zozo after Go mode for Arusta. Wow, that was a tongue twister of a sentence. The extra levels and getting requirements first meant that Arusta was able to fly by JS 827 1986, being unfazed at French Vanilla Poltergeist and Goddess in the Kefka's Tower climb with a final time of 126.34. And now let's get into some other highlights with our top 5 plays. First, we have to thank Tier 2 for Magic using Dispels on Jack's character inflicted with Stop so that they could resume dishing out the punishment. Then there's a couple of Katana Soul plays with IB Karma getting lucky with a Katana Soul mob formation during a random grind fight in order to nab an offering for his Valiant Knife user, and Verts505 using Sketch on Katana Soul, which will self-Slayer Edge for an easy W. Some more easy Ws come in the form of Boo's Berserked character getting an instant death proc on Ghost Train after being on the receiving end of an evil toot. Runner-up goes to Fictus for stealing not 1, but 2 Minervas from Pugs. Thanks for the boost, EA. And top spot goes to Dr. DT for showing us how to really get through the burning house quickly, dodging all of the flames in 3 out of the 4 rooms. Somehow that second room just seems impossible to avoid them, though. And for the fails of the week, we got to start out with Flurry's bad enemy roll getting an unwinnable Chupon fight in the Coliseum, having to reset out. More bad luck for Boo eating a level 4 flare that cannot be runicked, sorry realm, and Ficta taking a party wipe to 1 from Atma at the Inferno spot in Kefka's Tower. Our 4 spot goes to Matt, whose confused character didn't seem to listen to the advice from Vix and Wedge not to hit the shell against Welk. Number 3 is something I've never seen before and further proof that rounding is never your friend, as me, TheShwantz27, queued up a Sword Tech 5 to heal after a fallen one. However, a quarter cast ended up killing Terra for 1 damage. I guess 0.75 is close enough to 1. Womp womp. Runner-up goes to DoubleDown, who did not pass his level test against Doomgaze, and his entire party took a dirt nap to the opening level 5 Doom. Finally is a montage of all 8 deaths and resets to Final Kefka in the GBMatt versus Jabinator match. What a brutal final boss of this particular bout, finally getting a win on the 9th collective try for Matt. The next round of the Coliseum will feature the Gogo's Mirror flag set, which means we'll have Gogo to start and no global stat increases. Winning a Coliseum match gives the party the auto reflex status, which can be a blessing for incoming enemy attacks going back, but also a curse without being able to target the party to heal or provide boosts. So diving into the Coliseum might be a case of desperation for higher tier items. There are no command excludes, which means things like Shock, Magitech, and Possess are on the table. The XP multiplier is higher at 4 rather than 3, but the scaling for enemy levels, HP, and MP are all party highest level times 1, meaning that free progression won't count against scaling, so expect to see some Zone Eater plays. However, you cannot out-level your enemies until the level cap of 50. Ability scaling is at a slight nerf of 2.5 versus 2, and the Ultima spell will be available to our runners, so we'll see if we get some big blue bubble action. Well, that's going to do it for the round 2 recap. I can't wait to see what exciting things our runners get into with the 3rd round of the Coliseum, as the upper bracket has the week off, but the lower bracket has some incredible matchups, and Chupon's Pit will have to deal with Setzer's Dice. I've been TheShwantz27. Until next time.